Hi everyone, this is Trisha, and I'm back again today with another watercoloring project for you. Today I thought we'd do something a little different, and I'm going to use a stamp set from Gina K Designs called Framescape's Winter Trees. This is the finished card project, and I'm going to show you how we watercolor all of these elements just like we do with our art impression stamps, but using the Gina K Design stamps. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the background into my Misty. And the reason I'm using a Misty is because this background is so large, and I'm going to be doing some elements in different colors, and I'm going to be stamping them a few times. So I wanted to make sure that I got them exactly in the same place. So I'm using my Misty, my mini Misty for this project. So now I've loaded that into the Misty. I'm putting my watercolor paper in here. And I'm going to take a black marker and I'm going to ink up all around the edge of the stamp. So I've decided that I wanted to speed this up a little bit, so I'm going to speed it up so that you don't have to sit here and watch me color. And I'm just inking around the stamp. Now you'll notice when I stamp it down, because this is a large stamp, that it's kind of broken, so I just went over it another time just to kind of get a better line. Drop my marker just so that I get a little more of a solid line, so when I go to watercolor it, it's got enough pigment on it. This is the best part of the Misty. I don't have to worry about if it's lining up properly because it will always stamp in exactly the same spot. So now I'm just taking a pine green marker and I'm going to ink up just that right hand side of those trees. I'm going to do this in sections so that I get a nice impression and my marker doesn't dry out. So I'm just going to ink up this left hand side now and add a little more to the right. Now the green didn't really show up all that great, so I'm going in and I'm adding a little bit of black to those trees. And I'll stamp those again just to give them a little bit more color. As you can see now that I'm watercoloring, it brings the black and the gray, kind of make a really nice mixture of color. So I'm going to just take some water. I'm not using a ton of water. I kind of zoomed in here for you. I'm just using a little bit of water and a light touch just to kind of go over all of those lines. They blend really nicely, and it's going to be a really nice start to our scene. So I'm just kind of touching them just like I do when we watercolor with the art impression stamps, just kind of going over them. I'm not coloring them in solids, leaving some white space to give a little more definition. And then I'll just move on to these other little trees in this ground here. This is my first time watercoloring this type of stamps, and I'm really kind of happy with the way it came out. It's just another way for you to use your stamps in a different way and really stretch your stamps and what you have in your supplies. So now that we've done the trees, the next thing I want to do is pull the color right out of that frame. And I'm kind of using a little bit more water than I did on the trees because I really want to wash that out. Like I said, it doesn't really make that big of a difference. I'm going to end up cutting that off in the end. But bringing that black into the scene itself kind of gives a little more definition, a little more color. Which was an accident. I didn't know I was going to do that, and when I started this, the whole thing is just a work in progress. I just kind of went with it and let it take me where it was going to take me. So now you can see I'm using a little bit more water. I'm pulling some of that color up into the scene itself. I'm assuming that's snow underneath there. This is actually going to end up being a birthday card for my dad. And he loves trees and mountains and all that kind of stuff. So this will be a perfect card for him. So now I'm just grabbing some more of that black and bringing it into the center. And a little bit of, it's not a lot of water on my brush, so it's giving that nice dry brush effect there, which I kind of liked. So I put my my piece back into the Mini Misty, and I'm taking the mountains that are in the set, and I'm just positioning them where I want them to be. And again, I'm using this Misty because I'm going to end up stamping this a couple times, so I wanted to make sure it was going to be in the exact same spot. So I'm actually grabbing a slate color. It's a slate blue color, or steel blue, which gives a really nice snow colored effect on these mountains, I think. And they're in the distance, so I want them to kind of be a little lighter than if they were right up front. And I don't know what that, I was noticing this when I'm doing this voiceover, that the stamp has kind of like a white line across it. It's actually not even a white line, it's just the stamp has maybe a cut in or something. I don't know why it's stamping that way. I was noticing it was kind of weird, but I'm going to watercolor right over it, so it doesn't really matter. And then I'm moving that stamp set, the stamp mountains, to the left of those other ones, down a little bit more into the trees so they don't look exactly the same. I want this to be a little mountain range behind these trees. So again, I'm going to come in with the steel blue, and I'm going to ink those up, and I'm going to put them right next to the other ones. Now that I've done that, I'm going to take my water, and I'm using a number 8 black velvet brush. I like the size of this brush. I've been using it a lot lately, and I just like the size. I think it holds enough water, not too much water, but just enough. And I really wanted to saturate these lines for these mountains out back here. And I'm kind of bringing the color down just a bit behind those trees. So I'm just touching the areas where the blue is. I'm not doing anything with those white areas. I want them to remain white. So I'm going to take some of that color as I'm working on these mountains here, and I'm going to bring a little bit to the base of them. I'm going to drag a little bit out as I go, just to kind of create a horizon line so they really look like they're in the background and they're not right next to these trees. So I was trying to give a little snow, the effect of like a snowy horizon in the back there. And then I'll finish this little one up on the right here. Okay. Just making sure that line is nice and soft. And I decided I was going to bring a little bit of that green, just pull it out a little bit more. Okay, so now we'll move on. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn this upside down. I put some color out on my palette. I'm using a terracotta and a brilliant yellow and a gray. And I'll show you how I use these. I'm first putting this terracotta down, and I'm using it off my palette, and it's pretty watered down, as you can see, and I'm just kind of dropping the color into the water. It's not really totally saturated, but it is pretty watered down. So I'm dropping a little bit more color. I'm going to end up putting a little bit more on my palette because it got a little too watered down. And then I'm just bringing that orange. I saw these, we snowmobile in Vermont, and one night when my husband and I were out snowmobiling, I noticed that the sky was kind of like orange at the base, and then it was yellow, and then it came up to a gray, and then out to the blue. And I really loved it, so I really knew I wanted to watercolor that. So I'm trying to recreate that moment. It came out pretty good, especially in my opinion anyway. So now I'm getting a little bit of drying, so it made some harsh lines. So I'm just coming back in here. I added the brilliant yellow right next to that orange, trying to get it to blend out. And now I'm just using some clean water to blend out some of those edges. I didn't really want edges. I wanted it to be a nice gradient effect. Now I'm using the gray to try to soften that line. So I'm kind of just dropping gray in. I'll let this dry, and then I'll come in and I'll put some more orange and some more yellow. This is the steel blue again that we used on the mountains. At the top of this little, which then really kind of blends in with that frame, with the black of the frame, which I thought I liked the effect that gave. So there was some harsh edges that I wanted to get rid of, so I didn't use that much water, so it dried really quickly. So now I'm going to come back in. As you can see, I'm dabbing off the bottom of my brush to take out some of the water so that the pigment's a little more concentrated, so that it will blend a little bit better when I go to add a second layer of the yellow. Now I'm just trying to blend that yellow out with the orange, and it dried back a little, so I was glad I got to put a little more pigment in there and make it a little more vibrant. So now I'm going to add just a little more of that steel blue, and then I'm going to fade it down into the yellow with some clear water, and just let those two melt together. And I like the gradient effect that it had when it dried. So I was pretty satisfied with that. Now I'm just going to add a little more of that orange over to the side where I thought it might hit those trees. And now I'm just going to go in with my brush and add a little more green from my palette to those trees, just to give them a little more oomph. They kind of dried back a little more than I liked, so I was just adding a little more color to them. As you can see, I'm just pulling a little more of that green into the foreground. So now I decided I was going to put this little moose here, or it could be a moose, it could be a deer. And then as I was doing that, I'm like, oh, maybe I should put some birds in the sky first. I don't know what I was thinking there, but I inked up the birds with some black, and then I just stamped them randomly. I didn't touch them with water, I just left them the way they were. And now I'm going to put my piece back into the Misty, and we're going to watercolor this little moose. So now I'm going to put my moose right here where I want him, or down by the bottom, and I'm going to ink him up in a couple different colors. I'm going to ink him up in a mocha color, and I'm going to stamp that a couple times, and then I'm going to ink him up again in black. And what I think this will do is when I go to watercolor it, it'll have a nice variation in color. I wanted it to be really, really dark, like a silhouette. So I wanted to make sure that when I go to add the water, it doesn't just fade away. So I stamped it a couple times in the black too. And you'll notice after I put the water to it, it gets really dark, which is what I wanted. So I'm going to put some water on my brush. Now I don't need a ton of water because this is such a small guy, and I don't want him to wash out. And I'm tapping, not really like brushing the color around. I'm kind of tapping it so that it doesn't leave holes in the color. I wanted it to be as solid as possible. So I was really happy with how he came out. Then I decided to put a little bit of color just to ground him a little bit. I put a little bit of brown right underneath him. Now I'm going to take just a little bit of water and just to soften that underneath him, just soften that out a little bit. Just gives him a little shadow and grounds him a little bit better. So now I'm going to place my happy birthday right here in the upper right hand corner. And I'm going to place that in the Misty too, because I'm probably going to stamp it a couple times, or I might need to because it's watercolor paper. So it's always just a best bet to put it in the Misty, so if you have to do it more than once. I'm using some VersaFine ink. I'm just going to ink that up and stamp it down. So now I'm going to cut this piece out with these stitched rectangle dies that I have, and this will cut it out perfectly, so I don't have to worry about, you know, putting it in my cutter and trying to get it perfectly square or perfectly rectangle. I'm just going to cut it out. Then I made a mat. I actually cut that out with a bigger rectangle die, so it does have the stitching around it as well. So now I'm going to create my mat. So I have a piece of cardstock that is 5.5 by 8.25, and I scored it at 4.25. It's 8.5 by 5.5, sorry. And I scored it at 4.25. And then I just used my bone folder and did my edge. And now I'm going to take some really strong adhesive. I like to use this really strong adhesive on the back of my watercolor pieces because I feel like it holds it down better, because watercolor paper tends to try to curve up and away from the paper. So I find that if I put this really strong adhesive down, it keeps the watercolor paper adhered better to the card. So I'm just taking the backing off here, sort of. Yeah, sometimes I use a tool, sometimes I try to use my fingernails to get that adhesive off the back. And then I'm just placing it in the middle of my card base. And then I'll just take some Tombow adhesive and put that on the back of my cardstock. And I'll adhere that to the white card base. And I try to line that up as well as I can. And that's it for our card today. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you'd like this card, please give me a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more, please click here to subscribe. I've linked a couple other videos for you to check out. And I can't wait to see you next time. Have a great day.